So, I want to discuss what my aunt is doing with my brother's grave real quick because it's actually a perfect example, a very condensed but perfect example of what abuse can look like. So, we start out at the beginning. My aunt has no abuse towards my brother, except for ignoring what he went through, which, okay. From the beginning, I was upset. I spoke out that my brother did not have a headstone. For a decade, he had been buried without a headstone because his family did not see him as a real person. They felt like Dad had a headstone and they had the same name and they're right next to each other, so why buy another one? I never had the money myself, and it just never happened. So for a decade, my brother did not have a headstone. My aunt bought him one. Had it ended there, it would have been a reasonable situation. I was sad my brother was unmarked grave. My aunt marked his grave. Everybody's happy. But it didn't end there. Because then she decided that since she bought the headstone, she could do whatever she wanted to the grave. And then she started attacking the grave, visiting the grave with bottles of apple juice, telling me that she's going to have the body moved closer so that she could do that more often. You see how quickly it escalated from something very normal and even wholesome to something extremely sadistic and abusive that just keeps going and going and going. This is the third year in a row that they have held fundraisers to desecrate my brother's grave. And the main reason my aunt says that it's okay that she can do that is because she spent money to buy his headstone. There was nothing I could have done to stop her from buying the headstone. I couldn't have gone to the cemetery and said, look, this woman's abusive. I don't want her spending money on my brother's grave. Abusers find their way in any way they can. For my aunt, it was money. She has used money to buy something that means a lot to me so that she can regularly hurt that thing because it means a lot to me. It doesn't matter that that thing is her own nephew, her own blood, her own sister's child. It doesn't matter. Now it's just a thing that she has purchased to beat me with. And that's what abuse looks like. I need to clarify. Nobody in the family, the immediate family, me, my sisters, could afford to buy my brother the headstone. It wasn't that we didn't want to. It was that we as sisters were never in a position where we could afford it. Mom could, for a point, but she was a heavy alcoholic and she made choices. And one of those choices was that her son did not need a headstone. She made a lot of choices in our lives. That would have been the final one, I guess, for him. Because it led to where we're at now, where he's just a bargaining chip for an abusive sadist. Unfortunately, the reason my grandmother did not buy him one was from spite from my mother. Because when my father killed himself, my mom guilted the insurance company into giving her the $10,000, even though she wasn't supposed to get anything because it was a suicide. She never told my grandmother about that money. My grandmother put her in an apartment for a full year, thinking that she was destitute. And my mom stayed drunk off of the money that she had, off of money my grandmother was giving her. And it infuriated my grandmother when she found out that my mother had hidden all of this money from her. And she said she wasn't doing anything for my mother anymore. And so then later, when my brother passed away, the only person in the family that would have bought his headstone was not on good terms with my mother, and so she would not spend the money. When I say my family's abusive, it is every aspect of my family. My grandmother was, I don't like saying it, but she was. She had her moments where she could be extremely spiteful and cruel. She was always letting me know that I wasn't pretty enough, that I was too fat. She was always telling me that nobody was ever going to love me if I didn't fix myself up. As if aesthetic is all that matters in this world. That's what earned you love, being pretty. She had moments, and her refusal to buy my brother's headstone out of spite for my mother was one of those moments. And unfortunately, it's probably where Kathy gets some of her spiteful pettiness from, because this is generational abuse. This is generational trauma. My grandmother is the way she was because the way she was raised, and she raised her children to be the way they are, raised their children to be the way they are, who are raising their children to be the way they are. It just cycles through the generations.